Blood dripped from Cade Ashgrove's knuckles as he slammed the rogue wolf into the dirt for the third time. The forest around him had gone silent, except for the sound of his own breathing, and the low growl still trapped in his chest. 3 intruders had crossed into Ashgrove territory that morning, hoping to test the boundary while the pack slept. They had chosen the wrong night. The last rogue tried to scramble backward, eyes wide with fear, but Cade caught him by the collar of his torn shirt and lifted him off the ground with one arm. "Tell your alpha," Cade said, his voice flat and cold, "that this land belongs to me. If he sends more of you, I will not be as patient next time." He dropped the man, who fled into the trees without looking back. Cade stood alone in the clearing, chest heaving, the moonlight catching the sharp line of his jaw. Nobody in the Northern Territories dared to challenge him directly anymore, not after what happened to the Draven pack 2 winters ago. Not after the stories that traveled from town to town about the king who never lost, never bled long, and never once showed fear. Owen, his second in command, jogged up behind him, checking the tree line out of habit. "Clean sweep, no losses on our side." "Good," Cade said, wiping his hands on his pants. "Double the patrols near the river for the next few nights. I don't like how easily they got this close." "Understood." Owen hesitated, studying his king. "You didn't even shift. You took down 3 trained fighters as a man." Cade allowed himself a small, tired smile. "They weren't trained. They were desperate. There's a difference." The 2 men walked back toward the pack house in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of trust. Around them, the Ashgrove territory stretched wide and quiet, thick forest giving way to open fields, and beyond that, the lights of the pack house glowing warm against the dark. It was a good pack, a strong pack, and it belonged to a man who had never once, in 9 years of leadership, shown the slightest crack in his armor. That was about to change. The next morning, the pack house buzzed with a different kind of energy. Tables had been pushed against the walls of the great hall, and a woman named Nora, the eldest healer of the Ashgrove pack, stood at the center, directing a small team of assistants as they unpacked wooden crates, filled with glass vials and thin steel needles. "Careful with those," Nora said, her voice sharp but kind. "We only got enough for the whole pack if nobody breaks a single one." Among the assistants moving quietly through the chaos was a young woman named Wren Callahan. She kept her sleeves rolled up and her dark hair tied back, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who preferred to work rather than be noticed. Wren held the rank of Beta in the pack hierarchy, a title she had earned through skill rather than blood, but she rarely used it to draw attention to herself. She was the kind of person people forgot was in the room, right up until they needed her steady hands and calm voice. "Wren, take the Eastern list," Nora said, handing her a clipboard. "Every wolf in the lower ranks needs their yearly shot before the gathering next month. The alliance meeting with the Hallow Pack and the Windmere Pack means we cannot afford anyone falling sick this season." "Understood," Wren said, scanning the names. 53 wolves, a long day ahead. She had heard about the gathering for weeks now. Every 3 years, the northern packs came together to renew old treaties and settle disputes without bloodshed. It was considered one of the most important events in wolf politics, and Cade Ashgrove had never missed one. Some said his presence alone kept smaller packs safe from being swallowed up by larger, hungrier ones. Wren had seen him only a handful of times, always from a distance, always looking exactly like the stories described him. Tall, broad-shouldered, utterly unshaken by anything. By mid-afternoon, Wren had worked through half her list. Pack members young and old sat in the row of chairs Nora had set up, rolled up their sleeves without complaint, and moved on with their day. A few children cried, as children do, but even they settled quickly, once given a piece of candy from the jar on the healer's table. It was Owen who came to find her just before sunset. "Wren," he said, glancing over his shoulder like he was checking for something. "You're needed for a special appointment." She frowned, checking her clipboard. "I don't have anyone else scheduled today." "This one isn't on your list." Owen lowered his voice. "It's the Alpha." Wren blinked. "The Alpha needs his vaccination?" "He does. Nora wants you to handle it personally." "Something about your steady hand." Owen's mouth twitched like he was holding back a laugh, though Wren couldn't understand why. "All right," she said, gathering her supplies. "Where is he?" "That," Owen said, "is the tricky part. He's supposed to be in the West study right now. Supposed to be. They found the West study empty, a half-finished cup of tea sitting cold on the desk. They checked the training yard next, then the North Tower, then the stables, each time arriving just moments after Cade had apparently left. By the fourth stop, Wren noticed the pattern. "Is he avoiding this appointment?" she asked. Owen rubbed the back of his neck. "I wouldn't say avoiding. Exactly. Then what would you say?" "I'd say he has urgent business in every single room of this pack house, except the one where the needles are." Wren almost laughed, but caught herself. It seemed disrespectful to laugh at the man who had, by all accounts, torn through 3 armed intruders with his bare hands the night before, without so much as a scratch to show for it. Surely a healer's appointment could not be the thing that troubled him. They eventually found Cade in the war room, hunched over a map of the northern border with 2 of his senior fighters, pointing at something near the river and speaking in low, serious tones about patrol routes. He looked every bit the commanding leader Wren had imagined, sharp-eyed and focused, completely in control of the room. "Alpha," Owen said carefully, "your appointment." Cade did not look up. "Not now, Owen. This border discussion is critical. You said that about the tea, the stable inspection, and the tower windows. All of those were also critical." Cade's tone left no room for argument, or so he thought. Owen exchanged a glance with Wren, a silent conversation passing between 2 people who had clearly seen this exact scene play out before. Wren shifted her weight, unsure of her place in this quiet standoff between the pack's second-in-command and its king. She was, after all, new to being trusted with tasks that involved the Alpha directly. Most of her work involved children, elders, and the occasional nervous new mother. She had never once had to chase a grown man across an entire pack house with a syringe. "Alpha," Owen tried again, more firmly this time. "The gathering is in 4 weeks. If you are the only wolf in this pack who has not received the vaccination, it sets a bad example. You know this." Something flickered across Cade's face, quick and gone before Wren could name it. He straightened, rolling the map closed with more force than necessary. "Fine. Tomorrow morning. First thing." "You said that yesterday about today," Owen said. "I did not." "You absolutely did. I have witnesses." The 2 senior fighters at the table suddenly found their notes very interesting, clearly trying not to smile in front of their king. Wren watched the exchange with growing curiosity. There was something almost boyish in the way Cade avoided the topic, a stark contrast to the composed, dangerous leader she had heard described in every story whispered around the packhouse fires. "I have matters to attend to," Cade said finally, moving toward the door with purposeful steps. "Alpha," Wren said before she could stop herself. The word came out steadier than she expected, cutting through the tension in the room. Cade paused, turning to look at her properly for the first time. His eyes were a deep, unusual shade of gray, and up close, the weight of his presence felt heavier than she had anticipated. "You're the healer's assistant," he said. It wasn't a question. "Wren Callahan," she said, holding his gaze, even as her heart beat a little faster than it should have. "It will only take a moment of your time. I promise to be quick." For a long second, nobody in the room moved. Then Cade let out a slow breath through his nose, the kind of sound a man makes when he has run out of excuses and knows it. "Tomorrow," he said again, but this time there was less conviction behind it. "First thing in the morning. I give you my word." He left the room before anyone could argue further, his footsteps echoing down the hallway at a pace just slightly faster than his usual confident stride. Owen turned to Wren once the door had shut. "Congratulations. You just got closer to convincing him than anyone else has in 3 days." "He seemed almost nervous," Wren said slowly, still trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. "Almost," Owen agreed, a strange look crossing his face, like a man deciding whether or not to share a secret. "Let's just say tomorrow morning is going to be interesting. Bring extra supplies. And maybe bring Nora too, just in case." "Just in case of what?" Owen only shook his head, a small smile tugging at his mouth as he walked away, leaving Wren standing alone in the war room, with far more questions than answers. That night, Wren found it difficult to sleep. She kept replaying the strange scene in her mind, the way the fearless Alpha King had suddenly become a man full of excuses at the mention of a simple appointment. She had heard the stories about him, The same ones everyone in the pack had heard. How he faced down the Draven pack alone, rather than risk his fighters. How he once carried an injured pup through a snowstorm for 6 hours without resting. How he never once flinched in battle, no matter how outnumbered. None of those stories had prepared her for the man who ducked around 3 different rooms in his own home to avoid a healer's needle. She told herself it was nothing. Perhaps he simply had a busy schedule, and the appointment kept slipping his mind amid the pressures of leadership. Perhaps Owen was exaggerating for the sake of a good story. Wolves loved to gossip almost as much as humans did, and the idea of their fearsome king having any weakness at all was the kind of thing that could spread through a pack house in hours. But some small part of her, the part that noticed details others missed, could not shake the memory of his eyes when Owen mentioned the appointment. Just for a moment, before the mask of composure slid back into place, she had seen something there. Something that looked a great deal like genuine fear. Morning came, and Wren arrived at the medical wing early, laying out her supplies with careful precision. Nora joined her not long after, humming to herself as she checked the inventory of vials. "Big day," Nora said cheerfully. "Word travels fast in this pack house. Everyone's curious whether His Highness actually shows up this time." "You knew he's been avoiding this?" "Sweetheart, I've been trying to give that man his shot for a week. He's dodged me in the kitchen, the training yard, and once, I swear on my own life, he climbed out a window." Wren nearly dropped the tray of supplies in her hands. "He climbed out a window?" "Second floor," Nora confirmed, not even looking up from her work. "Landed just fine, of course. Man's built like a mountain. But the point stands. Our fearless leader has exactly one fear in this entire world, and it happens to be smaller than my thumb." Wren looked down at the tray in front of her, at the small glass vials and the thin, harmless-looking needles resting neatly in their tray. It seemed almost impossible that something so small could unsettle a man capable of the things Cade Ashgrove was known for. But she had seen it with her own eyes the day before, and Nora's story only confirmed what she already suspected. Whatever happened this morning, Wren had a feeling it was going to be a day she remembered for a very long time. The sound of raised voices echoed from down the hall, followed by heavy footsteps, and what sounded distinctly like someone being half-dragged across the wooden floor. Wren straightened, gripping the edge of the table, as the door to the medical wing burst open. Owen came through first, one hand braced against the doorframe, looking like a man who had just wrestled a bear into a small room. Behind him, 2 other senior fighters, Felix and Ian, flanked the Alpha King on either side, each holding one of his arms, with the kind of grip usually reserved for prisoners rather than kings. "Let go of me," Cade said, his voice carrying a warning edge that would have sent most pack members scattering. Felix and Ian did not let go. "Not until you're inside," Felix said, sounding entirely too cheerful about the situation. "Nora's orders." Actually, Nora's threats, if we're being specific. "I have a border meeting in 20 minutes. The border has survived without you for 9 years, Owen said. It can survive 20 more minutes. Nora stepped forward with her arms crossed, unimpressed by the entire display. "Alpha, sit down. This has gone on long enough. You are the strongest fighter this pack has ever seen, and yet I have spent an entire week chasing you through hallways, like a naughty child avoiding his supper." For a moment, Wren thought he might actually argue his way out of it, the way he had every other time. But something in Nora's tone, or perhaps sheer exhaustion from a week of dodging his own healers, made him exhale sharply and shake off the 2 fighters holding his arms. "Fine," he said. "I am here. Let's be done with it." He walked toward the chair in the center of the room with the stiff posture of a man walking toward his own execution rather than a routine appointment. Wren watched him settle into the seat, his broad shoulders tense, his hands gripping the armrests just a little too tightly. "Roll up your sleeve, Alpha," Nora said, gesturing for Wren to prepare the vial. Cade did not move. "Alpha," Nora repeated, more firmly this time. "I heard you the first time," he said, though he still made no effort to comply. His eyes flicked toward the tray of supplies on the table, and Wren noticed the muscle in his jaw twitch. Wren stepped forward, holding the tray with both hands. Up close, she could see something she had missed the day before. Cade Ashgrove, the man who had thrown 3 armed rogues into the dirt without breaking a sweat, had gone slightly pale. "It will only take a second," she said gently. the same tone she used with frightened children in her care. "I promise, you won't even feel it much." Cade's gaze snapped to her, something sharp and almost defensive flashing across his features. "I am not afraid," he said, though the words came out faster and firmer than necessary, the kind of denial that convinces no one, least of all the person saying it. "Of course not," Ren said carefully, deciding it was wiser not to argue the point. She reached for his arm, intending to roll up his sleeve herself, since he had made no move to do it. The moment her fingers touched the fabric near his wrist, Cade shot up out of the chair so fast that it toppled backward with a loud crash against the stone floor. Everyone in the room froze. Cade stood pressed against the wall on the far side of the room, chest rising and falling as though he had just run a great distance. His eyes were locked on the small glass vial in Ren's hand, like it was a weapon aimed directly at him. "Alpha?" Owen said carefully. "I need a moment," Cade said, his voice tighter than before. Nora pinched the bridge of her nose. "You have had an entire week of moments. This is different." "How, exactly, is this different?" Cade did not answer. He simply stood there, back pressed to the wall, breathing like a man bracing for battle rather than a 2-second injection. Ren lowered the tray slightly, unsure whether approaching him further would help or make things worse. "Perhaps," she offered. "If I explain exactly what will happen, it might help. Sometimes the unknown is worse than the actual event." Cade's eyes flicked to her, and for a brief moment, something vulnerable slipped through the cracks of his composure. It was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual stern expression, but Ren had seen it clearly enough to know it was real. "I know exactly what happens," he said. "I do not need it explained." "Then perhaps knowing isn't the problem," Ren said quietly, more to herself than to him. Nora threw up her hands. "I have delivered pups in the middle of thunderstorms. I have set broken bones for grown men twice your size, without them making half this fuss. What is it going to take?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Felix and Ian exchanged glances near the door, clearly torn between amusement and the fear of laughing in front of their king. Owen simply looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from repeating the same argument for the better part of a week. It was Ren who finally broke the silence, setting the tray down on the table with deliberate calm. "Everyone, please step outside for a moment." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? I think the Alpha would prefer fewer witnesses," Ren said, glancing toward Cade, who had not moved from his spot against the wall. "Sometimes it helps to have space." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Nora sighed and waved the others toward the door. "Fine, but if he climbs out that window, I am holding you responsible, young lady." The door clicked shut, leaving Ren and Cade alone in the medical wing. The silence that followed felt heavier than it had with the others in the room, though Ren couldn't say exactly why. Perhaps because there was no audience left to perform for. Perhaps because whatever happened next would be between only the two of them. "You didn't have to do that," Cade said after a moment, his voice quieter now, stripped of the commanding edge he usually carried. "I know," Ren said. "But it seemed like the right thing to do." He studied her for a long moment, gray eyes searching her face, like he was trying to determine whether she intended to mock him, the way half the pack house likely already was, somewhere behind closed doors and hushed voices. "You must think I am ridiculous," he said finally. "I think," Ren said carefully, choosing her words the way she always did when treating a frightened patient, "that everyone carries something that unsettles them, no matter how strong they are on the outside. It does not make you ridiculous, it makes you human, or wolf, or whatever the correct word is for what we are." Something in his shoulders loosened, just slightly. He pushed off from the wall and walked back toward the chair, though he did not sit down right away. 9 years, he said quietly. 9 years I have led this pack. I have faced things that would send most men running in the other direction, and I have never once hesitated. Not because I am fearless, but because hesitation gets people killed. My people. That sounds exhausting, Ren said. Cade let out a short, humorless laugh. You have no idea. So why does this frighten you, if you don't mind my asking? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the small metal tray on the table, as though it held the answer to a much larger question. It is not the needle itself, he said finally. It is what it represents, a moment where I have no control. where something small and sharp is going to happen to my body, and there is nothing I can do to stop it or fight it off. I can face an army. I cannot face that. Ren considered his words carefully before responding. What if, she said slowly, you had control over one part of it? What if you chose exactly when it happened, instead of it happening to you? Cade looked at her, curiosity flickering behind the tension in his eyes. What do you mean? I mean, Ren said, picking up the vial again, moving slowly and deliberately, so he could track every motion. You tell me when you are ready. Not Nora, not Owen, not anyone chasing you through hallways. You decide the moment. I will simply be here, waiting. For the first time since she had met him, Cade Ashgrove looked genuinely uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a decision that felt far bigger than it should have. He sat down slowly in the chair, gripping the armrests, but this time his eyes stayed on Ren, rather than the tray in her hands. All right, he said, his voice steadier than before, though still carrying a thread of tension underneath. I am ready. Ren stepped forward carefully, rolling up his sleeve with gentle, practiced movements. She kept talking as she worked, her voice low and even, describing nothing in particular, just filling the space with calm words the way she often did for frightened children in her care. Cade's eyes stayed fixed on her face rather than her hands. The moment passed quickly, over almost before it began. Cade let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for far longer than the actual procedure required, his shoulders sagging with visible relief. That's it, Ren said softly, pressing a small bandage over the spot. All finished. Cade stared at his own arm, like he could not quite believe it was over. Then he looked up at Ren, with an expression she had not seen on him before, something between disbelief and quiet gratitude. Thank you, he said simply. You're welcome, Alpha. Cade, he said. Just Cade. At least when it is only the two of us. Ren nodded, something warm settling in her chest that she chose not to examine too closely. Cade, she repeated. When they emerged from the medical wing a few minutes later, Owen, Nora, Felix, and Ian were all still waiting outside, clearly bracing for another chaotic scene. Instead, they found their king walking out calmly, sleeve rolled back down, a small bandage visible at the edge of his wrist. Nora's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Well, she said, I suppose miracles do happen. Cade said nothing, but as he walked past Ren toward the war room, he paused just long enough to say, quietly, so only she could hear, same time next year, I suppose. Or sooner, Ren said, if you ever need someone to keep the room empty again. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile touched the corner of his mouth before he continued down the hallway, leaving Ren standing there, wondering exactly what had just happened, and why she found herself hoping there would be a reason to see him again soon. News of what happened in the medical wing spread through the pack house faster than a wildfire through dry grass. By midday, 3 different versions of the story were already circulating among the lower ranks, each one more dramatic than the last. One version claimed the Alpha had fainted. Another insisted he had tried to shift into wolf form to escape through the window. A third, whispered only among the youngest pack members, suggested he had cried. None of it was true, but Ren found she could do very little to stop the rumors once they started. She kept her head down, focused on finishing the remaining vaccinations on her list, and tried to ignore the curious glances thrown her way by pack members who had heard she was somehow involved in whatever had happened behind those closed doors. You're famous now, said Clara, a fellow healer's assistant, and one of the few people in the pack house Ren considered a true friend. They sat together at the edge of the training yard during a rare break, watching the younger fighters practice their forms under Felix's supervision. I did not do anything special, Ren said, though the words felt only partially true. You got the Alpha King to sit still for a shot, Clara said, raising an eyebrow. Do you understand how many people have tried and failed at that exact task this week? I heard Nora chased him around the kitchen with a broom on Tuesday. Ren nearly choked on her water. She did not. She absolutely did. Ask anyone in the kitchen staff. He hid behind a barrel of flour. Despite herself, Ren laughed, the image entirely too vivid and entirely too endearing for a man of Cade's reputation. It was strange to think of the same person who commanded fear and respect throughout the Northern Territories reduced to hiding behind kitchen supplies to avoid a routine appointment. "It is not funny," Ren said, still smiling. He was genuinely distressed. "I am not laughing at him," Clara said, though her grin suggested otherwise. "I am laughing at the sheer scale of the situation. 9 years of leadership, undefeated in every fight anyone can remember, and his one true enemy turns out to be a piece of medical equipment smaller than my finger." Ren shook her head, though a small smile remained on her face as she returned to her work. She told herself the matter was closed, a strange but resolved incident that would fade from pack gossip within a week or two, the way most things did. She was wrong. 3 days later, Ren was called to the pack house infirmary for what she assumed would be a routine check on one of the younger pups who had come down with a minor fever. Instead, she found Cade standing near the entrance, looking noticeably out of place among the shelves of medical supplies. "Alpha," she said, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said quickly, then seemed to reconsider his tone. "That is, nothing urgent. I wanted to speak with you, if you have a moment." Ren glanced around the empty infirmary. Clara had stepped out to fetch fresh linens, and Nora was occupied elsewhere in the pack house, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet room. "Of course," Ren said, setting down the supplies she had been organizing. "What can I help with?" Cade shifted his weight, an unusual gesture for a man who typically carried himself with such unwavering confidence. "The gathering with the Hallow and Windmere packs is in less than a month. Nora tells me each pack leader is expected to receive a second vaccination before the treaty renewal, as a show of good faith and health to our allies." Ren's stomach dropped slightly, understanding immediately where this conversation was heading. "I see. I would prefer," Cade continued, his tone carefully measured, "that you be the one to administer it, if that is possible to arrange." "I would need Nora's approval, but I do not see why that would be a problem," Ren said. "May I ask why you prefer me specifically?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying the shelves of supplies, rather than meeting her gaze directly. "You did not laugh," he said finally. "You did not treat me like a curiosity, or a joke, or a failure. You simply helped, the way you would help anyone else who came to you afraid." Something in Ren's chest tightened at the honesty in his voice. She had expected him to make some excuse about efficiency or convenience, not something so openly vulnerable. "I would be glad to help again," she said softly. "Whenever you need it." Cade nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "There is one condition," he added, almost as an afterthought. "What happened in that room stays between us. I do not need the entire Northern Territory hearing stories about their king cowering from a needle." "Of course," Ren said, "though I should warn you, the rumors have already started." "Something about hiding behind a flour barrel." Cade's expression turned briefly horrified. "That is a gross exaggeration." "Is it?" "I was simply retrieving something from the pantry, while hiding from Nora's broom." Cade's jaw tightened, though there was no real anger behind it, only the embarrassed frustration of a man whose secret had grown far beyond his control. "The details of that particular incident are not important." "Of course, Alpha." "Cade," he corrected, the same way he had before. "Cade," Ren repeated, and something about saying his name so casually still felt strange and new, like she was stepping into territory she had no right to occupy. Over the following weeks, their arrangement settled into a quiet, private rhythm. Cade would appear at the infirmary during the quieter hours, usually early morning before the rest of the pack house stirred, and Ren would handle whatever small medical matter needed attention, always careful to keep the room clear of onlookers when it came to anything involving needles. What began as a single vaccination became a standing routine, as Nora, sensing the delicate balance Ren had managed to strike, quietly assigned all of the Alpha's future medical care to her, without ever asking too many questions. During these quiet mornings, Ren began to see sides of Cade that the rest of the pack rarely witnessed. He asked about her work, genuinely curious about the plants she used for certain remedies and the techniques she had learned from Nora over the years. He spoke, in small, careful pieces, about the weight of leading a pack through difficult seasons, about decisions that kept him awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep, about the loneliness that came with being the person everyone looked to for strength. Ren found herself looking forward to these mornings more than she was willing to admit, even to herself. There was something disarming about watching the fearless Alpha King become, for just a few minutes each week, an ordinary man with an ordinary fear, one she had the privilege of helping him face. It was during one of these quiet appointments, roughly 2 weeks before the gathering, that Cade mentioned something he had never spoken of before. "When I was young," he said, staring at the small bandage on his arm rather than at Ren, "before I became Alpha, my father was still alive. He was a good leader, but a hard man. He believed showing any weakness, any fear, made a wolf unfit to lead." "That sounds like an unfair burden for a child to carry," Ren said quietly. "It was the only way I knew," Cade continued. "When I was young, I broke my arm falling from the training platform. My father insisted the healer set the bone without anything to dull the pain, said it would teach me to endure. I remember the needle they used afterward, for infection, more clearly than I remember the pain of the break itself. I have not been able to separate the two since." Ren's heart ached at the image of a young boy forced to endure pain silently, taught that fear itself was a failure rather than a natural part of being alive. She understood, suddenly and completely, why the needle had become such an outsized fear for a man who faced physical danger, without hesitation, in every other part of his life. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. Cade finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I have not told anyone that story, not even Owen, and he has been by my side since we were both pups." "Why me?" Ren asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because you never once made me feel small for being afraid," he said. "Everyone else in my life expects me to be unshakable. You are the only person who has ever let me simply be a person." The words settled over Ren like something warm and fragile, a gift she had not expected to receive. She did not know what to say in response, so instead she simply reached out and gently squeezed his hand, a small gesture that carried far more weight than either of them spoke aloud. Outside the infirmary walls, the pack continued its preparations for the upcoming gathering, unaware of the quiet transformation happening in these small, private moments. Nobody could have predicted that within the month, the fragile trust building between the fearless Alpha King and his quiet Beta healer would be tested in front of the very allies and rivals whose opinions mattered most. The morning of the gathering arrived with a heavy fog rolling in from the eastern hills, wrapping the Ashgrove packhouse in a silver haze that made the whole world feel quiet and still. Wagons from the Hallow and Windmere packs had already begun arriving the night before, their banners snapping in the wind as fighters and healers and pack leaders filed into the guest quarters prepared for them. Ren had never seen so many strangers gathered in one place. The Hallow pack wore deep green colors and moved with the disciplined precision of soldiers, while the Windmere pack, larger and louder, filled the courtyard with laughter and the smell of roasted meat from their traveling cooks. At the center of it all stood the 3 pack leaders who would spend the coming days negotiating treaties, trade agreements, and the delicate balance of power that kept the northern territories from falling into war. Cade stood at the head of the welcoming party, dressed in formal attire that Ren had never seen him wear before. Dark fabric fitted to his broad frame, a silver chain resting against his collar that marked his rank. He looked every inch the powerful leader his reputation promised, greeting the arriving pack leaders with firm handshakes and measured words that carried authority without arrogance. "He cleans up well," Clara whispered beside Ren, both of them watching from a respectful distance near the healer's tent that had been set up to handle any medical needs during the gathering. "He always looks like that," Ren said, though she could not entirely disagree. "Not like that," Clara said, grinning. "Today he looks like he actually wants people to notice." Ren chose not to respond, though she privately agreed there was something different about the way Cade carried himself that morning, a subtle confidence layered over the usual weight of leadership. Whatever quiet moments they had shared over the past weeks remained locked safely behind the infirmary doors, invisible to the crowd of strangers filling the courtyard. The Hallow Pack's Alpha, a stern woman named Grace, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, greeted Cade with a formal bow. "Ashgrove," she said. "Your territory remains as impressive as ever." "Grace," Cade replied. "I trust the journey was uneventful." "Mostly," she said, glancing meaningfully toward the Windmere delegation, where a large, boisterous man was already loudly complaining about the quality of the guest quarters. "Though I cannot speak for everyone's patience." The Windmere Pack's Alpha, a man named Garrick Thorne, finally broke away from his complaints long enough to approach Cade directly, his expression carrying none of the polite formality the occasion called for. Garrick was taller than Cade by a few inches, built like a wall, with a reputation nearly as fearsome as the Ashgrove King's own, though built on a foundation of aggression rather than restraint. "Ashgrove," Garrick said, clasping Cade's hand with a grip that seemed designed to test rather than greet. "Still standing, I see. I half expected someone might have finally knocked you down by now." "Not for lack of trying, I imagine," Cade replied evenly, his tone giving nothing away, though Wren noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "We shall see how the negotiations go," Garrick said with a thin smile. "I have heard interesting things about the current state of your pack's discipline." Something about the way Garrick said those words made the hair on Wren's arms stand up, though she could not place exactly why. Beside her, Clara had gone very still, no longer joking about anything. "What do you think he meant by that?" Wren whispered. "I don't know," Clara said quietly. "But Garrick Thorne does not say things without reason. He is testing something." The opening ceremonies continued through the afternoon. Formal speeches and shared meals meant to establish goodwill, before the harder negotiations began the following day. Wren spent most of her time at the healer's tent, treating minor scrapes and travel fatigue among the visiting pack members, while keeping half an eye on the proceedings happening across the courtyard. It was late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin and the fires were lit against the growing cold, that Nora found Wren near the supply tables, her expression uncharacteristically tense. "There's a change to the schedule," Nora said quietly, glancing around to make sure nobody else was listening. "As part of the treaty renewal ceremony tomorrow, all 3 alphas are required to demonstrate their health before the assembled packs. It is an old tradition, meant to prove that no leader is hiding illness or weakness that might destabilize the alliance." Wren felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "What does the demonstration involve?" "A public vaccination," Nora said, "in front of all 3 packs. Each pack's healer administers it to their own alpha, as a symbol of trust between leader and healer." "In front of everyone," Wren repeated slowly. "In front of everyone," Nora confirmed. "I only just learned of this myself. Apparently it has not been required at the last 2 gatherings, but Garrick Thorne specifically requested its return this year, citing the old treaty language." Wren's mind raced immediately to Cade, to the private moments they had shared over the past weeks, to the careful arrangement they had built to protect him from exactly this kind of public exposure. Whatever Garrick Thorne's true intentions were, the timing felt far too deliberate to be coincidence. "Does the Alpha know?" Wren asked. "Owen is telling him now," Nora said grimly. "I imagine it is not going over well." They found Cade a short while later in the small study set aside for the Ashgrove leadership during the gathering, pacing the length of the room, while Owen stood near the door, looking deeply uncomfortable. "This is absurd," Cade was saying as Wren entered. "An old tradition that has not been observed in 6 years, suddenly resurrected the moment Garrick Thorne walks onto my territory. Does anyone else find that suspicious?" "Everyone finds it suspicious," Owen said. "But the treaty language is clear. If we refuse the tradition, it gives Garrick grounds to question our fitness to lead, and potentially, our fitness to remain part of the alliance at all." "Then we are trapped," Cade said, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Wren had never seen him make before. It was the closest thing to visible panic she had witnessed since that very first day in the medical wing. His eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment, the mask of composure he wore in front of Owen slipped just enough for Wren to see the genuine fear underneath. "Wren," he said, his voice quieter than before, "tomorrow, it has to be you." "I assumed as much," she said, stepping further into the room. "But Cade, this will not be like our private appointments. There will be no clearing the room. Every pack in the Northern Territories will be watching." "I know," he said, and the 2 simple words carried more weight than any speech he had given that entire day. Owen looked between the 2 of them, something clicking into place behind his eyes that had clearly been building for weeks. "How long have you 2 been managing this on your own?" "Since the health inspection," Wren admitted. "It seemed easier than involving the whole pack house in something so private." Owen let out a slow breath. "Well, I suppose that explains a great deal about why our alpha has been noticeably less likely to climb out of windows lately." Despite the tension in the room, a small, tired laugh escaped Cade, quickly fading back into worry, as the reality of the following day settled over him once more. I cannot fail in front of Garrick Thorne, Cade said quietly. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever fear I have to face, I cannot let it become a weapon he uses against this pack. Ren stepped closer, meeting his eyes with the same steady calm she had offered him from their very first appointment. Then we will make sure it doesn't, she said. We have time to prepare. We are not walking into that ceremony unprepared. How do you propose we prepare for something like this? Cade asked. Ren considered the question carefully, already turning ideas over in her mind. We practice, she said finally, tonight, and again in the morning before the ceremony. Not the procedure itself, since we cannot waste supplies, but the feeling of it, the stillness, the trust. If your body remembers calm instead of fear, tomorrow becomes easier. Cade studied her for a long moment, something like hope flickering behind the worry in his eyes. You truly believe that will work? I believe, Ren said, that you have already come further than anyone expected, including yourself. One more step should not be impossible, especially with the right preparation. Owen, watching the exchange with growing understanding, quietly excused himself from the room, leaving the two of them alone amid the flickering candlelight and the distant sound of the gathering's evening celebrations continuing outside. Whatever Garrick Thorne's true purpose had been in reviving the old tradition, tomorrow would reveal whether his gamble had found its mark, or whether the quiet trust built between a fearless king and his steady healer would prove strong enough to withstand the weight of every watching eye in the Northern Territories. The morning of the ceremony broke clear and cold, the fog from the previous day having burned away to reveal a bright, cloudless sky that felt almost mocking in its cheerfulness, given the tension gripping the Ashgrove packhouse. Ren woke before dawn, unable to sleep more than a few restless hours, her mind cycling through every possible way the ceremony could unfold. She found Cade already awake when she arrived at his private study, standing near the window with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the courtyard below where servants were arranging chairs and banners for the coming ceremony. You didn't sleep, she said, not needing to ask. Neither did you, from the look of it, he replied, turning to face her. They spent the early morning hours exactly as Ren had suggested, though not with needles or medical supplies. Instead, she guided him through simple breathing exercises, the same techniques she used with frightened children before difficult procedures, teaching him to slow his heartbeat and quiet the instinctive alarm that flared through his body at the mere thought of what awaited him. Focus on my voice, she said softly, sitting across from him as the pale morning light filled the room. Not on what will happen, just on this moment, right now, where nothing is happening at all. Cade closed his eyes, his broad shoulders slowly loosening with each measured breath. This feels strange, he admitted. Being guided like this. Strange does not mean wrong, Ren said. Sometimes the things that help us most feel unfamiliar at first. They practiced the stillness together for nearly an hour, Ren occasionally touching his wrist lightly, mimicking the sensation of preparation without ever bringing an actual needle into the room. Each time, Cade's initial flinch grew smaller, his breathing remaining steadier, until finally, he could sit through the entire simulated routine, without his jaw clenching or his hands gripping the chair. Better, Ren said, genuine pride coloring her voice. Much better. It still will not feel like this in front of 3 assembled packs, Cade said, though some of the earlier panic had drained from his tone. No, Ren agreed honestly, but you will have something you did not have before. You will have practice, and you will have someone beside you, who already knows exactly how to help you through it. Cade looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them that neither dared to name aloud given everything else weighing on the day ahead. Thank you, he said simply. For all of this, I do not know how I would be facing today without you. You would find a way, Ren said. You always do. I am simply making the path a little smoother. By mid-morning, the courtyard had filled with representatives from all 3 packs, rows of chairs arranged in a wide semicircle, facing a raised wooden platform, where the ceremony would take place. Ren stood near the edge of the platform with her small case of supplies, watching as Grace and Garrick took their positions alongside their own healers, each preparing for the same public demonstration that had thrown the Ashgrove packhouse into quiet chaos the night before. Nora appeared at Ren's side, moments before the ceremony began, squeezing her shoulder briefly. "You can do this," the older healer said. "Both of you." "I know," Ren said, though her stomach still twisted with nerves she refused to show. The ceremony opened with formal speeches from all three pack leaders, words about unity and shared strength that Ren barely heard over the pounding of her own heartbeat. She kept her eyes fixed on Cade, standing tall and composed at the center of the platform, giving no outward sign of the turmoil she knew churned beneath his calm exterior. When Grace's turn came first, the Hallow Alpha rolled up her sleeve without hesitation, her own healer administering the injection with practiced efficiency, while the crowd offered polite applause. Garrick went next, making a show of flexing his arm afterward, as though the moment had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience, drawing louder cheers from his own pack's assembled representatives. Then it was Cade's turn. The crowd quieted as he stepped forward, and Ren moved with him, positioning herself exactly as they had practiced that morning. She could see the tension coiled tight in his shoulders, the way his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd, rather than on the tray of supplies in her hands. "Look at me," Ren said quietly, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear it over the murmur of the watching crowd. Cade's eyes shifted to meet hers, and something in his expression steadied, the way it always did during their private sessions. "Breathe with me," she continued, matching her own breathing to the slow, measured rhythm they had practiced. "Just like this morning. Nothing has changed. It is only you and me in this moment." Across the platform, Garrick Thorne watched with sharp, calculating eyes, clearly anticipating the same hesitation and panic that had apparently reached his ears through whatever rumors had traveled between packs over recent weeks. Ren noticed his gaze, noticed the way his lips curved into a thin, expectant smile, and felt a fierce determination rise up inside her chest. Cade would not give this man the satisfaction of watching him fail. "I am ready," Cade said quietly, his voice steady enough that only Ren, standing this close, could hear the faint thread of tension still running beneath the surface. She moved quickly and gently, exactly as they had practiced, her hands steady despite the weight of every watching eye in the courtyard. The moment passed in seconds, over almost before the crowd had time to register it had begun at all. Cade did not flinch. He did not step back. He simply stood there, breathing steadily, his gray eyes locked on Ren's face, until she pressed the small bandage into place and stepped back, giving him room to face the crowd once more. A beat of silence passed. Then the assembled packs erupted into applause, no different from the polite response given to Grace and Garrick moments before. To every watching eye, the Alpha King of the Ashgrove pack had faced the tradition with the same calm strength he brought to every other challenge in his life. Only Ren knew the truth of what it had cost him to stand there so still. Garrick's expression flickered, something like disappointment crossing his features before he quickly masked it with polite applause of his own. Whatever he had hoped to witness, whatever weakness he had expected to exploit in front of the assembled packs, he had not gotten it. The ceremony continued through the rest of the morning, treaty documents signed and formal agreements renewed between the three pack leaders. Ren returned to her position near the healer's tent, her hands trembling slightly now that the immediate pressure had passed, adrenaline slowly draining from her system. It was nearly an hour later, during a break in the formal proceedings, that Cade found her again, slipping away from the crowd of pack leaders and dignitaries, to seek her out, near the edge of the courtyard. "You did it," Ren said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "We did it," Cade corrected gently. "I could not have stood on that platform without you beside me." "You would have found another way," Ren said, echoing his own words back to him from earlier that morning. Cade shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "I do not believe I would have. Not like that. Not calmly. Not without the entire Northern Territory witnessing exactly the weakness Garrick Thorne was hoping to expose." He reached out, gently taking her hand in his, a gesture far more intimate than anything they had shared before, even during their most private moments in the infirmary. "Whatever this is between us," he said quietly, "I do not wish to pretend any longer that it is simply a matter of medical convenience." Ren's heart raced, though for entirely different reasons than the fear that had gripped her throughout the ceremony. "Cade," she said softly, "we are standing in the middle of a treaty gathering, surrounded by 3 packs worth of witnesses." "I am aware," he said, though he made no move to release her hand. Perhaps that is precisely why I finally found the courage to say it. Before Ren could respond, a shadow fell across them both, and they turned to find Garrick Thorne standing a short distance away, his sharp eyes moving between the two of them with obvious interest. "Ashgrove," Garrick said, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw the attention of several nearby pack members. "I did not realize your personal healer held such a close position in your affairs. How very interesting." The warmth in Cade's expression vanished instantly, replaced by the guarded composure Ren recognized from countless negotiations and formal encounters. Whatever fragile, private moment they had just shared, it was clear that Garrick Thorne's interruption carried far more weight than simple curiosity, and Ren felt a cold certainty settle over her that this was only the beginning of a much larger challenge still to come. Cade released Ren's hand slowly, though not out of shame, but rather with the deliberate calm of a man repositioning himself before a fight he had not chosen but could not avoid. "Garrick," he said evenly, "is there something you need?" "Merely observing," Garrick said, his smile thin and calculated. It is not every day one sees the great Alpha King so openly comfortable in the presence of a beta-ranked healer. Most leaders of your standing prefer to keep such matters private, don't you think? "There is nothing improper happening here," Cade said, his tone carrying the same warning edge Ren had heard on the night of the border skirmish weeks earlier. "Of course not," Garrick said smoothly, though his eyes lingered on Ren a moment longer than necessary, assessing her the way a wolf might assess unfamiliar territory. "I simply find it noteworthy. A leader's choices, personal or political, tend to say a great deal about the strength of his pack." "Wouldn't you agree, Grace?" The Hallow Alpha, who had been standing nearby overseeing the treaty documents, glanced up with mild interest. "I try not to concern myself with the personal affairs of allied leaders," she said diplomatically, clearly unwilling to be drawn into whatever game Garrick was attempting to play. Garrick's smile did not waver, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Wise policy," he said. "Though I confess, watching your healer guide you through today's ceremony, Ashgrove, I could not help noticing how closely she stayed by your side, almost as though you required more support than the rest of us." The implication landed exactly as intended, a subtle jab wrapped in polite words, the kind of comment designed to plant doubt without ever stating anything outright. Ren felt her stomach tighten, understanding immediately that Garrick had noticed far more during the ceremony than either of them had hoped. "Every healer stays close during such procedures," Cade said, his composure never slipping, though Ren could sense the tension coiling tighter beneath his calm exterior. "It is standard practice, as I am sure your own healer would confirm." "Naturally," Garrick said, inclining his head slightly. "I meant no offense. Merely an observation, offered in the spirit of the transparency this gathering is meant to encourage." He excused himself shortly after, drifting back toward his own pack's delegation, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken tension. Grace lingered a moment longer, studying Cade with an expression Ren could not quite read. "Be careful, Ashgrove," Grace said quietly, once Garrick was out of earshot. "Garrick Thorne does not raise questions without purpose. If he sensed even a flicker of hesitation during that ceremony, he will not let the matter rest quietly." "I appreciate the warning," Cade said. Grace nodded once, then followed after her own delegation, leaving Ren and Cade alone once more, amid the thinning crowd of the courtyard. "He suspects something," Ren said quietly, once Grace had moved out of earshot. "He suspects a great deal," Cade agreed grimly. "Whether he has proof of anything specific is another matter entirely." The gathering continued for 2 more days, filled with careful negotiations, shared meals, and the constant undercurrent of political maneuvering that Ren was quickly learning defined every interaction between the northern packs. She kept her distance from Cade during the formal proceedings, unwilling to give Garrick any further opportunity to draw attention to whatever connection had grown between them, though she found the enforced separation more difficult than she had expected. It was on the final evening of the gathering, during the closing feast meant to celebrate the successful renewal of the treaty, that the fragile peace of the past 2 days finally cracked. Ren had been assisting Nora at the healer's table near the edge of the feast, tending to a Windmere fighter who had injured his hand during an afternoon sparring match, when raised voices drew her attention toward the center of the gathering. A small crowd had formed near the main fire pit, and at its center stood Garrick Thorne, goblet in hand, addressing the assembled leaders and their delegations with the loud, theatrical confidence of a man who had clearly consumed more than his fair share of the evening's wine. "A toast," Garrick announced, raising his cup high enough for the firelight to catch the liquid inside. "To strength, true strength, the kind that does not waver, does not hide, does not require a gentle hand to guide it through the smallest of challenges." A murmur rippled through the crowd, several pack members exchanging uncertain glances at the pointed nature of the toast. Cade, seated near the head table alongside Grace, went very still, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious target of Garrick's words. "I have heard," Garrick continued, his voice carrying easily across the quiet courtyard, "some interesting stories this week, about a certain leader who required his personal healer's constant presence just to endure the simplest of ceremonies. One wonders what such a leader might do when facing a true threat, rather than a harmless needle." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, some voices rising in confusion, others in outrage at the blatant insult delivered in front of the entire gathering. Wren's hands went cold, her heart pounding as she watched Cade slowly rise from his seat, every line of his body radiating controlled fury, rather than the panic Garrick had clearly hoped to provoke. "Garrick," Cade said, his voice carrying the same commanding weight Wren had heard on the night of the border skirmish. "If you have something to say it plainly, rather than hiding behind riddles and wine." Garrick's smile widened, clearly pleased to have finally drawn the reaction he had been fishing for all evening. "Very well," he said. "I question whether a leader who cannot face a simple medical procedure without hand-holding is truly fit to lead a pack of this size. I question whether the Ashgrove territory's continued place in this alliance should depend on a man with such an obvious weakness." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, exactly the kind of public challenge that could unravel years of carefully built reputation in a matter of moments. Wren felt frozen in place, watching the scene unfold with growing dread, knowing that whatever Cade said next would determine far more than his own standing among the assembled packs. "I have faced rogue wolves alone, rather than risk my fighters," Cade said, his voice steady, despite the weight of every watching eye. "I have carried injured pups through snowstorms, and defended this territory without hesitation for 9 years. If my only weakness, as you call it, is a needle, then I consider that a fair trade for everything else I have given this pack and this alliance." "A fair trade," Garrick repeated, his tone dripping with mock consideration. "Or perhaps a convenient excuse for cowardice, dressed up in noble language." The word landed like a blow, and Wren saw something shift in Cade's expression, a flicker of the old shame he had described to her weeks earlier, the childhood lesson that fear itself made a wolf unfit to lead. For a moment, she feared he might retreat into denial, might insist there was no fear at all, rather than risk further exposure in front of the assembled crowd. Instead, Cade did something Wren had not expected. He turned, searching the crowd until his eyes found hers, standing near the healer's table, with her heart pounding in her chest. And in that moment, surrounded by 3 packs worth of witnesses, with Garrick Thorne's challenge still hanging heavy in the air, Cade Ashgrove made a choice that would define everything that came after. "Yes," Cade said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent courtyard. "I am afraid of needles. I have been since I was a child, since a lesson my father believed would make me stronger, instead taught me to fear the very thing meant to keep me healthy." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd, whispers breaking out among the assembled pack members, who had never expected such an open admission from a leader known throughout the Northern Territories for his unshakable composure. Garrick's expression flickered with surprise, clearly having anticipated denial or deflection rather than honesty. "I have faced this fear quietly for most of my life," Cade continued, "because I believed, as many of you likely still believe, that admitting it would make me appear weak, unfit, something less than what a leader should be." He paused, his eyes finding Wren's once more across the distance separating them. "I was wrong." The courtyard fell utterly silent, every eye now moving between Cade and the young healer standing near the edge of the gathering, understanding beginning to dawn on several faces at once. "Strength," Cade said, turning back to address the crowd, "is not the absence of fear. It never has been. True strength is facing that fear anyway, and finding the courage to be honest about it, rather than hiding behind false bravado. I did not conquer this fear alone. I had help, from someone who never once made me feel small for needing it. He gestured toward Ren, and every head in the courtyard turned to follow his gesture. Dozens of curious eyes suddenly fixed on her. Ren felt her face flush with heat, torn between the instinct to disappear into the crowd and the fierce pride swelling in her chest at watching Cade claim his vulnerability so openly. Ren Callahan, Cade continued, has shown me more about true leadership in the past month than I learned in 9 years of ruling this pack alone. She did not treat my fear as weakness. She helped me face it, with patience and skill I have rarely encountered in anyone, regardless of rank. Garrick, sensing the crowd's mood shifting away from his intended humiliation, attempted to salvage his position. A touching speech, he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. But it does not change the fact that a leader with such a glaring vulnerability presents a risk to this alliance. Does it? Cade asked, turning his sharp gray eyes fully onto the Windmere Alpha. Tell me, Garrick, have you never faced a fear of your own? Never once felt your heart race before a battle, or your hands tremble before a difficult decision? Garrick's jaw tightened, clearly caught off guard by the direct question. That is different, he said stiffly. Fear in battle is natural. This is a needle. Fear does not measure itself by the size of what causes it, Cade replied. It measures itself by what a person does in spite of it. I have led this pack through 9 years of hardship, threat, and difficult decisions, and I have never once let this particular fear compromise my duty to my people. I stood on that platform 2 days ago and faced the exact thing you hoped would break me, and I did not fail. Ask yourself, Garrick, what exactly you hoped to gain by exposing something so small, when it clearly changed nothing about my ability to lead. The crowd's murmurs shifted noticeably now, several pack members nodding in quiet agreement, clearly moved by the honesty and quiet dignity in Cade's response. Grace, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally rose from her seat, her expression carrying obvious approval. I believe, Grace said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension, that the Ashgrove Pack's fitness within this alliance has never been in question, regardless of tonight's discussion. A leader who can stand before his allies and admit vulnerability without shame demonstrates precisely the kind of character this alliance was built to reward. Several voices among the assembled crowd rose in agreement, and Ren watched as the tide of public opinion, which had wavered dangerously toward Garrick's manufactured scandal only minutes before, shifted firmly back in Cade's favor. Garrick, recognizing the failure of his gambit, offered a stiff, insincere apology before retreating toward his own delegation, his earlier confidence noticeably deflated. The feast slowly resumed its earlier atmosphere, conversations picking back up around the fire pits as the tension of the confrontation gradually eased. But Ren remained rooted to her spot near the healer's table, still processing everything that had just happened, still feeling the weight of every eye that had turned toward her during Cade's speech. It was several minutes before Cade made his way through the crowd to reach her, several pack members offering him quiet words of respect as he passed, a stark contrast to the humiliation Garrick had clearly hoped to inflict. I apologize, Cade said quietly once he reached her, for putting you in the center of that so publicly. I did not plan to say any of that. It simply felt like the only honest response left to give. Do not apologize, Ren said, her voice steadier than she felt. What you did tonight took more courage than anything I have ever witnessed, and I have seen you fight 3 armed men without hesitation. Cade's mouth curved into a small, tired smile. Somehow, admitting fear in front of 3 packs felt considerably more difficult than that fight. I imagine it did, Ren said softly. Owen appeared beside them a moment later, clapping a firm hand on Cade's shoulder. That, he said, was either the bravest or the most reckless thing I have ever seen you do, possibly both. I am inclined to agree, Cade said. For what it is worth, Owen continued, glancing toward Ren with newfound respect. I do not think Garrick expected that outcome at all. You turned his own trap into the very thing that strengthened your standing among the other packs. That was not the plan, Cade admitted. I simply refused to let him make Ren's role in my life something shameful to hide. The remainder of the evening passed more peacefully, though Ren noticed the curious glances that continued to follow her throughout the rest of the feast. no longer suspicious or judgmental, but rather thoughtful, as pack members from all three territories quietly reconsidered what they had witnessed. By the time the gathering concluded the following morning, with formal farewells exchanged between the three pack leaders, word of Cade's honest confession and Garrick's failed manipulation had already begun spreading far beyond the Ashgrove territory. As the Windmere delegation departed, Garrick paused just long enough to offer Cade one final, measured look, something unreadable passing behind his sharp eyes. "This is not finished, Ashgrove," he said quietly, low enough that only Cade and Wren, standing close by, could hear the words. "Perhaps not," Cade replied evenly, "but I no longer fear what you might say about me, Garrick. That, more than anything else, is something you cannot take away." Garrick said nothing further, mounting his horse and leading his delegation away from the Ashgrove territory, without another word. Wren watched him go, a lingering unease settling in her chest despite the victory of the previous night. Something told her Garrick Thorne was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and whatever quiet threat lingered behind his parting words would not remain quiet for long. In the weeks following the gathering, life within the Ashgrove packhouse settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by the very public revelation of what had once been Cade's most guarded secret. To Wren's relief, the reaction among the pack members proved far kinder than she had feared. Rather than viewing their alpha with less respect, most seemed to hold him in higher regard than ever before, moved by the honesty he had shown in front of rival packs, rather than hiding behind false strength. "You should hear what the younger fighters are saying," Clara told her one afternoon as they worked side by side in the infirmary, sorting through freshly delivered medical supplies. "Half of them are saying it takes more courage to admit fear in front of an audience than to win a fight. The other half are just relieved to know their alpha is not some untouchable myth." "I am glad," Wren said, though a small worry still lingered at the edges of her relief. "I was afraid it might change how people saw him. For the worse, I mean." "It changed how people see him," Clara agreed, "just not in the way you were afraid of." What worried Wren far more than the pack's opinion was the shift in how people now viewed her own role within the Ashgrove hierarchy. Where she had once moved through the packhouse largely unnoticed, she now found herself the subject of constant, curious attention, whispered conversations trailing off whenever she entered a room, pack members offering her a strange mixture of respect and suspicion, depending on their personal opinions about what exactly her relationship with the Alpha had become. "They think I manipulated my way into his favor," Wren said one evening, sitting across from Nora in the quiet of the healer's private study. "I have heard the whispers. Some believe I orchestrated the entire situation from the beginning, using his fear to gain influence I never earned through rank or skill." Nora set down the herbs she had been sorting, giving Wren her full attention. "And what do you believe?" she asked. "I believe," Wren said slowly, "that I only ever tried to help a frightened man through something difficult. Nothing more." "Then hold on to that truth," Nora said firmly. "Gossip has a short memory when it is not fed. Ignore it. Continue your work with the same integrity you always have, and it will fade in time." Wren wanted desperately to believe her mentor's words, but the whispers only seemed to grow louder as the weeks passed, fueled in part by Cade's own visible efforts to seek her out, no longer confined to the quiet privacy of early morning appointments. He began finding reasons to walk with her through the packhouse gardens, to sit beside her during shared meals in the great hall, small gestures that carried significant weight given his position and the attention that naturally followed his every move. "You should be careful," Owen warned Cade one afternoon, the two of them walking the perimeter of the training yard, while Wren worked nearby with a group of injured fighters. "I do not say this to discourage whatever is happening between you and Wren, but the pack is talking. Some wonder whether you are elevating her beyond her earned rank, simply because of personal feeling. Wren has earned every bit of respect she receives," Cade said, an edge of protectiveness entering his voice. "Her skill as a healer speaks for itself, regardless of anything happening between us personally." "I know that," Owen said, "and you know that, but perception matters, especially for a leader in your position. If the pack believes favoritism is influencing your decisions, it creates instability, regardless of whether the belief is true." Cade fell silent, clearly troubled by his friend's warning, though unwilling to dismiss it outright given Owen's long history of sound counsel. That evening, He sought out Ren in the quiet of the infirmary, finding her alone as she prepared supplies for the following day's rounds. "Owen believes I am putting you in a difficult position," he said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her workstation. "By seeking you out so openly, by allowing the pack to speculate about what exists between us." Ren set down the vial she had been holding, considering his words carefully before responding. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Being open about what happened at the gathering, about our arrangement, about everything since?" "No," Cade said immediately, without hesitation. "I do not regret a single moment of honesty, but I worry that my openness has placed an unfair burden on you. You did not ask to become the subject of packhouse gossip. You did not ask for strangers to question your integrity, based on nothing more than proximity to me." "You are right," Ren said quietly. "I did not ask for any of this, but I also do not regret helping you, or the friendship that grew from it, or whatever else this has become between us. If the cost of that is a few weeks of whispered gossip, I find I am willing to bear it." Cade reached across the small distance between them, taking her hand gently in his. "You deserve better than whispered gossip and suspicious glances," he said. "You deserve recognition for the skill and compassion you bring to this pack, not speculation about favoritism you never sought." "Then give me time," Ren said. "Time for the pack to see what you already know, that nothing about my work or my worth depends on my relationship with you. Let my skill speak for itself, the same way it always has." Cade nodded slowly, though the worry in his eyes did not fully fade. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the particular cruelty of being judged for something beyond one's control, whether that was an old fear planted by a hard father, or unearned suspicion cast by a curious pack. He resolved, in that quiet moment, to find some way to protect Ren from the growing weight of packhouse gossip, though he did not yet know exactly how such protection might take shape. The answer arrived sooner than either of them expected, though not in the form either had anticipated. 3 days later, a messenger arrived from the Windmere territory, carrying a formal letter bearing Garrick Thorne's seal, addressed directly to Cade. The contents of that letter would set into motion a challenge far more dangerous than any whispered gossip circulating through the Ashgrove packhouse, one that would test not only the trust between Cade and Ren, but the very foundation of the alliance itself. Cade read the letter twice, before setting it down on his desk, his expression unreadable, as Owen and Felix waited for him to speak. Ren stood near the window, having been summoned the moment the messenger departed, sensing from the tension in the room that whatever the letter contained affected her directly. "Garrick has called for a formal council," Cade said finally, "a gathering of pack leaders, to review whether the Ashgrove territory's leadership remains stable enough to honor the terms of the alliance. He is citing my public admission at the last gathering as grounds for concern, along with what he calls, and I quote, an inappropriate elevation of an unranked healer's assistant to a position of influence over pack decisions. He is calling for a vote of confidence," Owen said grimly, "using the very honesty that strengthened your standing among the packs as a weapon against you now. And targeting Ren directly," Felix added, his jaw tight with anger. "This is exactly what he tried at the gathering, only now with formal weight behind it." Ren felt her stomach drop, the careful peace of the past weeks shattering under the weight of Garrick's renewed attack. "What happens if the council rules against you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "In theory," Cade said slowly, "a pack leader deemed unstable or unfit can be removed from the alliance, or in extreme cases, challenged for leadership entirely by another qualified wolf within his own pack, or an outside claimant, if the council deems the situation severe enough." The implication hung heavy in the room. Garrick was not merely seeking to embarrass Cade this time. He was attempting to manufacture grounds for a genuine challenge to his leadership, using both his admitted fear and his relationship with Ren as evidence of instability. "This is absurd," Ren said, anger finally breaking through her fear. "You have led this pack successfully for 9 years. One honest admission and one friendship should not be enough to undo that. Garrick knows that as well as we do," Owen said, "which is precisely why he is not relying on those facts alone. He will twist the narrative, paint your honesty as weakness after all, paint your relationship with Ren as evidence of poor judgment clouding your leadership decisions." The council was set to convene in 1 week's time, at neutral ground near the border between the three territories, giving Cade little time to prepare a defense against Garrick's calculated attack. Word of the challenge spread quickly through the Ashgrove packhouse, and Wren once again found herself the subject of intense scrutiny, though now colored by genuine fear rather than mere curiosity. "This is my fault," she said one evening, sitting with Nora in the quiet of the infirmary, as the older healer treated a minor cut on her hand, sustained during a distracted moment while sorting supplies. "If I had never gotten involved, if I had simply administered his shots quietly and kept my distance otherwise, none of this would be happening." "Nonsense," Nora said firmly, tying off the bandage with practiced efficiency. "If you had kept your distance, our Alpha would still be climbing out of windows and hiding behind flour barrels, and Garrick Thorne would have found some other excuse to challenge him eventually. Men like Garrick do not need real grievances. They manufacture them from whatever material is available. But the material this time is me," Wren said quietly. "The material this time," Nora corrected, "is Garrick's own insecurity dressed up as concern for the Alliance. Do not carry guilt for another man's manipulation, child. You have done nothing wrong." Despite Nora's reassurance, Wren could not fully shake the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest. She found Cade later that same evening in his study, poring over old treaty documents and precedent cases, searching for any legal foundation that might strengthen his position before the council. "You should withdraw from public involvement in this," she said, standing in the doorway, "at least until the council has made its decision. If Garrick cannot point to visible evidence of our relationship, perhaps his argument loses some of its strength." Cade looked up from his papers, something firm and immovable settling into his expression. "No," he said simply. "Cade, be reasonable. This is a genuine threat to your position, to your entire pack's stability. I am willing to step back if it protects you." "And I am not willing to let you," he said, rising from his desk to close the distance between them. "Wren, I told an entire gathering of 3 packs that you helped me find courage I did not know I possessed. I will not now retreat from that truth, simply because Garrick Thorne has found a new way to weaponize it. If I hide you away to save my position, I become exactly the kind of leader who hides fear behind false strength, the very thing I refused to be at that gathering." "But what if it costs you everything?" Wren asked, her voice breaking slightly with the fear she had been carrying since the letter arrived. Cade reached up, gently cupping her face in his hands, the gesture more tender than anything he had allowed himself before. "Then it cost me everything," he said quietly. "But I would rather lose my position with my integrity intact than keep it by betraying the very honesty that got me here in the first place." The week that followed passed in a blur of preparation, Owen and Felix working alongside Cade to gather testimony from pack members willing to speak on his behalf, cataloging the countless decisions and sacrifices he had made throughout 9 years of leadership that Garrick's narrow accusation conveniently ignored. Wren, despite her fears, refused to retreat into the shadows, instead continuing her work openly, treating pack members with the same skill and compassion she always had, refusing to let suspicion or gossip alter the quality of her care. When the day of the council finally arrived, the 3 pack delegations gathered once more at the neutral border grounds, though the atmosphere carried none of the celebratory energy of the earlier treaty gathering. Instead, a tense formality hung over the assembled leaders, as Garrick Thorne rose to present his case, his voice carrying the same calculated confidence that had nearly succeeded once before. "I do not raise this challenge lightly," Garrick began, addressing the gathered council of pack elders and leaders. "But the stability of this alliance depends on strong, clear-headed leadership, free from personal weakness that might compromise difficult decisions in times of true crisis. Alpha Ashgrove has openly admitted to a debilitating fear that required the constant intervention of an unranked pack member, one who has since been elevated to a position of personal influence far beyond her station. I ask this council to consider whether such circumstances truly reflect the strength this alliance requires." The council chamber fell silent, all eyes turning toward Cade as he rose to offer his defense, the weight of 9 years of leadership and the fragile future of everything he had built resting entirely on the words he was about to speak. Cade rose slowly, taking a moment to look around the council chamber, meeting the eyes of Grace, of the elder representatives from each of the 3 packs, and finally, of Garrick Thorne himself, seated with an expression of practiced confidence, that did little to hide the calculation beneath. 9 years ago, Cade began, I took on the responsibility of leading the Ashgrove pack after my father's death. In that time, I have defended our territory against rogue attacks, negotiated fair trade agreements that benefited every pack in this alliance, and made difficult decisions that cost me sleep, but never cost my people their safety. Not once, in 9 years, has my fear of a medical needle interfered with any duty I owe to this pack or this alliance. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber before continuing. Garrick suggests that admitting fear reflects weakness, unfit for leadership. I would ask this council to consider a different question entirely. What kind of leader hides his weaknesses so completely that his own people never see him as anything but a myth? What happens to a pack when their leader believes fear itself must be buried rather than faced honestly? I was raised by a father who believed exactly what Garrick now argues, that any admission of fear made a wolf unfit to lead. That belief nearly broke something in me as a child. It took a healer with more patience and compassion than I deserved to teach me that facing fear honestly makes a person stronger, not weaker. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Wren, who stood near the edge of the chamber alongside Nora and Owen, her heart pounding as every eye in the room shifted toward her once more. Wren Callahan did not manipulate her way into influence over my decisions, Cade continued. She helped me face something I had hidden for most of my life, without judgment, without exploiting my vulnerability for her own gain. If this council wishes to judge my fitness to lead, judge it by the decisions I have made for this pack over 9 years, not by a single honest admission made in front of an audience, or by a friendship that has made me a better leader rather than a worse one. Grace rose from her seat, her expression carrying the same quiet approval she had shown at the previous gathering. I have known Cade Ashgrove for many years, she said, addressing the assembled council. I have negotiated with him during difficult disputes, watched him make sacrifices few leaders would willingly make for the sake of peace. Nothing about his admitted fear, or his relationship with his healer, has ever suggested instability to me. If anything, his willingness to face this council honestly, rather than deny the accusations outright, speaks to exactly the kind of integrity this alliance should value. Several other council members voiced their agreement. Testimonies from Ashgrove pack members read aloud, detailing years of steady, thoughtful leadership that Garrick's narrow accusation had conveniently overlooked. Even members of the Windmere delegation, uncomfortable with the direction their own alpha had taken the proceedings, offered quiet support for Cade's position. Garrick, sensing the tide turning firmly against him for the second time, attempted one final gambit. Even if his leadership record stands, he said, his voice tighter than before, the elevation of an unranked healer to such personal significance sets a dangerous precedent. What happens the next time a pack leader's personal feelings influence decisions that should be made purely for the good of the pack? It was Wren who finally stepped forward, her own voice steady, despite the fear still coursing through her veins, surprising even herself with the calm resolve that settled over her as she addressed the council directly. With respect, she said, I have never once influenced a decision affecting this pack or this alliance beyond my role as a healer. I did not seek elevation or influence. I simply offered help to someone who needed it, the same way I offer help to every pack member who comes to me afraid or in pain. If this council believes compassion and skill should be punished rather than valued, then I fear the true instability lies not in Alpha Ashgrove's leadership, but in the values this alliance claims to uphold. A long silence followed her words, the council elders exchanging quiet glances before the eldest among them, a stooped but sharp-eyed wolf named Peter, who had served on the council for decades, finally rose to speak. I have listened carefully to both arguments presented today, Peter said, and I find myself unconvinced that either Alpha Ashgrove's honesty or his relationship with his healer represents any genuine threat to this alliance's stability. If anything, I find his willingness to face this challenge directly, rather than retreating into denial or deflection, to be precisely the quality this council should hope for in every pack leader within our alliance. The council's vote, when it finally came, fell overwhelmingly in Cade's favor, with only Garrick's own delegation offering any support for the challenge. Garrick sat rigid in his seat as the decision was announced, his earlier confidence completely drained, replaced by the bitter recognition of a second failed attempt to undermine a rival he had never managed to defeat through honest means. As the council chamber slowly emptied, Cade found Ren, waiting near the entrance, relief and exhaustion both evident on her face, after the tension of the proceedings. "You did not have to speak," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "I would have understood, if you had chosen to remain silent." "I could not remain silent," Ren said. "Not when everything you had built was being questioned because of choices we made together. If I was going to be part of the reason this challenge existed, I needed to be part of defending against it as well." Owen approached them, a rare, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, "I believe that settles the matter rather thoroughly. Garrick Thorne has now failed twice to shake your position, Alpha. I suspect he will think twice before attempting a third time." "Let us hope so," Cade said, though the tension in his shoulders had finally begun to ease. In the months that followed, the Ashgrove Pack settled into a new kind of stability, one built not on the myth of an untouchable, fearless leader, but on the genuine respect earned by a man willing to face his own vulnerabilities honestly, and the quiet strength of the woman who had helped him do so. Ren's standing within the pack grew steadily, no longer whispered about with suspicion, but recognized openly for the skill and compassion she brought to every patient in her care, regardless of rank or title. Cade never fully lost his fear of needles, though with Ren's continued help, each yearly appointment grew easier than the last, the sharp edge of old childhood trauma slowly softening under years of patient, gentle care. More than that, the trust they had built during those quiet early morning sessions in the infirmary blossomed into something neither of them had expected to find, amid the pressures of pack leadership and political rivalry. Years later, when younger pack members asked about the scar on the Alpha's reputation that Garrick Thorne had once tried so hard to create, the older pack members would simply smile and tell a different story entirely. Not one of weakness exposed, but of strength redefined. A story about a fearless king who learned that true courage meant facing your fears honestly, and about the quiet beta healer who stood beside him through every trial that followed, proving that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked members of a pack carry the greatest strength of all. Cade Ashgrove ruled the Northern Territories for many more years after that difficult season, his leadership stronger and more respected than ever before, not despite his admitted fear, but because of the honesty and humility that fear had ultimately taught him. And through every challenge that followed, Ren Callahan remained by his side, no longer simply his healer, but his equal, his partner, and the steady heart that had once, quite literally, stood between him and the thing he feared most.